Back in 2020, Deshaun Watson was the most productive passer in the NFL after throwing for 4,823 yards. He finished that season with 33 touchdowns and only 7 interceptions, which is incredible when you realize he was playing for a 4-win team with no run game and a defense that couldn't stop anyone. Fast forward 6 years now to his time in Cleveland, and he looks completely different. His Achilles tore twice during that stretch, and he eventually posted the lowest total QBR among all qualified starters in the league, while becoming a laughingstock in the process. We're going to walk through every step of this collapse to actually see where it all went wrong. We have to go back to 2020 where this really starts, because the Deshaun Watson deal doesn't sting as much if you don't realize how good Cleveland actually was back then. The 2020 Cleveland Browns finished the year 11-5 and made their first trip to the playoffs in 18 years. Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year, and he did it by building an identity around the physical, dominant roster. Nick Chubb was established as one of the best pure runners in the sport, and having Kareem Hunt as a second option out the backfield made the rushing attack nearly impossible to stop. The offensive line was stout enough to move anyone off the ball, and the defense finally had the talent to compete with the heavy hitters in the AFC. For one full healthy season, Baker Mayfield looked exactly like the franchise quarterback that Cleveland had been searching for since the Bernie Kosar era ended decades ago. Baker's stats from that year might not jump off the page immediately, but his 28 touchdowns against only 8 interceptions showed that he was finally playing winning football. He was efficient with his QBR, finishing in the top 10 because the Browns were built the right way. Stefanski did a masterful job of scheming around what Baker did well while hiding his limitations, and the result was a team that could beat anyone, which led to a wildcard matchup in Pittsburgh that Cleveland fans have been waiting a lifetime to see. The Browns came out and hung 28 points on the Steelers in the first quarter alone, which set a new NFL playoff record for the most points scored in an opening frame. Big Ben struggled all night and threw 4 interceptions, while Baker stayed calm and finished with 263 yards and 3 TDs. When the clock hit 0, the final score was 48-37 Cleveland, giving the Browns their first playoff victory since 1994. And if you were a Cleveland fan watching that game, you didn't just have hope for the future, you genuinely believed the team had finally arrived. They ended up losing the following week in Kansas City, but losing to the defending champion Chiefs didn't feel like a failure because the progress was so obvious. But their success didn't last long. To understand why they walked away from that success, you have to look at what was happening about 250 miles south in Houston during that same period. While the city of Cleveland was busy celebrating their first playoff win in a generation, the Texans were quietly self-destructing, and their superstar player was about to hit the trade block. The problem wasn't that Watson lacked talent, because he was truly a great player, but the Browns saw that greatness and panicked. After the next season, they decided the quarterback who had just won them a playoff game wasn't good enough, and they gambled that their window wouldn't stay open unless they paid the highest price possible for an upgrade. And with that, I want to give a huge thank you to our partner Kalshi for sponsoring today's video. Since we're speaking about Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns, I had to check out what the market was for Deshaun to be the Week 1 starter in the 2026 season. Kalshi is the largest legal prediction market in the US with over 1 million users. Right now, you can trade on whether you think Deshaun Watson will be the Week 1 starter next season. The contract is currently sitting at 33 cents, meaning the market thinks there's a 33% chance that this actually happens. If you trade at 33 cents and you're right, then you get $1 per contract. What's cool about Kalshi is that it's peer-to-peer trading, no sportsbook tilting odds against you or limiting your trades when you start winning. And it's available in all 50 states. If you want to try it out, Kalshi's giving away $20 to anybody who uses my code down below and also trades with $20. Thanks again to Kalshi for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back into it. Houston drafted Deshaun Watson in 2017, and he didn't take very long to show the entire world that he was special. During the 2018 and 2019 seasons, he earned back-to-back Pro Bowl nods while averaging 4,000 yards and 26 touchdowns each year. He put up those massive numbers while playing behind an offensive line that allowed sacks at one of the highest rates in football, proving he could still produce even when the pocket was collapsing. The Texans were structurally flawed in almost every single way a professional team can be, yet Watson still consistently found ways to make the offense look functional. When you look at his completion percentage and yards per attempt, it became clear that he wasn't just a product of a good system. He was a playmaker who specialized in creating something from nothing, and the game showed a quarterback who was carrying a broken franchise on his back. Everything changed in 2020 when Watson managed to take his game to an even higher level despite the chaos surrounding him. While the raw stats are impressive on their own, the context behind that season is what really tells the story. Houston traded away DeAndre Hopkins that offseason, losing a top 3 wide receiver for a package centered around David Johnson and a second-round pick. It was widely considered one of the worst trades in modern NFL history, leaving Watson without his primary weapon and stuck behind a porous offensive line. Even after the team started the year with 4 straight losses and fired their head coach, Deshaun still managed to lead the entire league in passing yards. He finished that season with 33 touchdowns against only 7 interceptions while completing 70% of his passes. He had a rare ability to absorb pressure and deliver accurate strikes while moving, which is only a trait 4 or 5 QBs in any given era truly possess. Watson looked like he belonged in that elite tier, and his talent was undeniable to anyone watching. The relationship between the player and the team finally fractured in January 2021 when Watson told the Texans he wanted out. He cited frustrations with the hiring process for the new GM, and his trade request immediately put half the league on high alert. You had a 25-year-old Pro Bowl QB under contract who wanted a fresh start, which meant every team with cap space and a bit of ambition started making calls. However, the situation became incredibly complicated in March of 2021, when 22 civil lawsuits were filed against Watson. These filings alleged sexual misconduct during various massage sessions, leading to a massive legal battle that overshadowed his football career. While 2 separate grand juries in Texas eventually declined to indict him on criminal charges, Watson and his legal team spent months maintaining that every encounter was consensual. The civil lawsuits remained a major hurdle, and the NFL launched an independent investigation under its personal conduct policy to determine if a suspension was necessary. The league made it very clear that discipline could still happen regardless of what happened in the courtroom, leaving his future in total limbo. Houston decided the best path forward was to keep him on the roster but off the field entirely. Deshaun sat out the whole 2021 season, collecting his base salary while he never took a single snap during the regular season. He essentially became a ghost who was present on the salary cap but invisible on Sundays. By the time 2021 wrapped up, Watson had spent over a year away from competitive football. The lawsuits were still in process of being settled, and the NFL's investigation remained wide open with no clear end in sight. Despite those massive red flags, a handful of franchises were still weighing the risks, and Cleveland was one of the teams deciding if the baggage was worth the chance to land one of the most talented QBs they had seen in decades. The Browns eventually decided the talent was worth the price. Expectations were sky high for Cleveland heading into the 2021 season. The Browns were coming off an 11-win year and a massive playoff victory, which made them look like legitimate contenders in a crowded AFC. All of that momentum came to a screeching halt though during a Week 2 matchup against the Houston Texans. During that game, Baker Mayfield threw an interception and tried to make a tackle to stop the return. His left shoulder took a direct hit that resulted in a torn labrum, and even though it was his non-throwing arm, the injury was significant. The Browns decided to keep playing him rather than opting for immediate surgery, which forced Baker to wear a restrictive harness. He spent the rest of the year trying to operate at NFL speed while managing an injury that clearly messed with his throwing mechanics and pocket presence. The drop-off was immediate and devastating for the Cleveland offense. Before the injury, Baker was completing over 80% of his passes, but that number plummeted to below 60% for the remainder of the season. His QBR dropped by 30 points compared to the 2020 campaign, marking the largest single-season decline for any starting QB in the league. The Browns struggled to find any rhythm, finishing the year with an 8-9 record and missing the postseason entirely. But the problems weren't just happening on the field, as the locker room culture began to unravel in a very public way. In the middle of the season, Odell Beckham Jr.'s father posted a video to Instagram that highlighted every time Baker missed an open OBJ. The footage went viral immediately, and when Odell didn't reach out to Baker or disavow the video, the Browns felt they had no choice but to release him. Beckham went on to win a Super Bowl with the Rams just a few months later, which made the narrative around Baker in Cleveland turn even more sour. After a game in Pittsburgh where he was sacked 9 times, he openly criticized Kevin Stefanski's game plan during his post-game comments. That kind of public call-out is hard to move past, and it shattered the fragile trust between the quarterback and the head coach on a national stage. While Baker was trying to salvage his reputation, the front office was already looking for his replacement. GM Andrew Berry met with Baker's agent at the NFL Scouting Combine in February to discuss the future of the position. Berry mentioned that the team might look into acquiring an all-pro caliber quarterback. Baker's camp knew exactly what that meant, and they realized Deshaun Watson was also on that list. The message was loud and clear. The Browns were officially shopping for an upgrade. The situation reached a boiling point on March 15th when Baker found out through social media that the team was moving on. He didn't get a phone call or a meeting. Instead, he saw reports that the Browns leadership had flown to Houston to meet with Watson in person. Before the plane even landed back in Ohio, Baker posted a goodbye letter to the fans expressing how disrespected he felt by the organization. 3 days later, on March 18th, the Browns finalized a blockbuster trade to acquire Watson from the Texans. Cleveland gave up 3 first-round picks from 2022 through 2024, along with several other selections to a Houston team that was desperate for draft capital. To seal the deal, Watson signed a 5-year contract worth $230 million that was fully guaranteed. No other player in the history of the NFL had ever received a deal with that kind of structure. If Watson played like an elite quarterback, it was a move that could change the franchise forever, but if he failed, the team had no way to get out of this deal. There was no exit strategy. The NFL finally wrapped up its private investigation in August of 2022, and they handed Watson an 11-game suspension, a $5 million fine, and a mandatory treatment program. While the league office had pushed internally for a full season, the settlement eventually landed at 11 games, which meant Watson would miss the first 2/3 of the year before returning in Week 13 for the final stretch. Jacoby Brissett took over the starting job in his absence and played exactly how you would expect him to play. He was solid but not spectacular. Cleveland went 4-7 during those first 11 games, so by the time Watson was cleared to return, the playoff picture was already a mess and the pressure on him to justify the trade was through the roof. His first game back came in Week 13 against his former team in Houston, and for a brief moment it looked like things might actually click. He moved well in the pocket and his arm looked sharp in a few spots, but over those final 6 games, the rust became impossible to ignore. Watson completed just 58% of his passes while his yards per attempt plummeted, and he finished that stretch with 7 touchdowns against 5 interceptions. He posted a QBR in the low 40s as the Browns went 3-3, eventually falling out of the playoff race on the final weekend of the season because the offense never found a rhythm. The timing between Watson and his receivers was just gone, and those quick anticipatory throws that made him electric in Houston were nowhere to be found. The thing is, this shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone watching though. He had been away from live NFL action for nearly 2 full calendar years by the time he took that first snap in Week 13. And rust at the QB position is about more than just physical health. The Browns went into 2023 telling everyone who would listen that this was the year everything would finally come together. Watson was healthy, he had a full offseason under his belt, and the offense was loaded with weapons. For about 6 weeks, it actually looked like they might be right. Watson started 6 games that year, though he dealt with a rotator cuff strain early on that cost him 2 starts before he actually returned to the lineup. Then in Week 10 against Baltimore, he took a hit to his throwing shoulder that fractured his glenoid, which is the socket joint where the shoulder connects. He played the second half of that game anyway, going 14-14 in the final 2 quarters to lead a comeback win, and it was easily the best stretch of football he ever played in a Cleveland uniform. The wild part is that he did all this while his throwing shoulder literally had a fractured bone in it, but he had surgery the following week and his season was over again. What happened next is one of the strangest things we've seen in recent NFL history. The Browns signed Joe Flacco off the street in November when he was 38 years old and hadn't started a game in over a year. Then Flacco got his number called and he threw for 1,616 yards and 13 touchdowns in just 5 regular season starts, leading Cleveland to 4 straight wins and a playoff berth. He ended up winning Comeback Player of the Year at the NFL Honors, which is still ridiculous because Damar Hamlin literally died on the field and came back to life, but whatever. In the meantime, Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year for the 2nd time, and the Browns somehow made the postseason despite starting 5 different QBs that year. But here's the thing, none of that success had anything to do with Deshaun Watson. That's the reality that should land the hardest when you look back at the 2023 season. The Browns were actually a good football team again because their defense was historically elite and their coaching staff was thriving. The team found a way to win with a 39-year-old free agent who wasn't even on the roster in October, while Watson was rehabbing a fractured shoulder in the background as the franchise moved on without him. Heading into 2024, the story that Cleveland kept telling everybody felt familiar. They were saying things like Watson was fully healthy again, he had the whole offseason to prepare, and the shoulder injury was supposedly behind him. All things we had heard before. The Browns went into training camp talking about how finally they would be turning a corner, and you can understand why they needed to believe that because there was no other real option. He was on the roster, the money was already spent, and the draft picks were gone, so the team had to believe it was going to work, but it didn't. Watson started 7 games and went 1-6, posting 5 touchdowns against 3 interceptions and the lowest total QBR of any qualified starter in the entire league. He didn't just have the lowest score among struggling quarterbacks, he was at the very bottom of the list for everyone. The box score made the performances look mediocre-ish, but the eye test made it look even worse because that explosiveness from Houston years ago was completely gone. He looked hesitant in the pocket and kept locking onto his first read, missing throws he would have made without even thinking 5 years ago. That improv quality and the ability to keep a play alive while finding a window downfield had vanished, and it was clear that whoever that QB was in 2020 wasn't on the field anymore. Then Week 7 against Cincinnati arrived and everything fell apart for good. Watson dropped back, planted his foot, and his right Achilles snapped, which led to him being carted off the field and the fans of Cleveland cheering. That would have been a brutal enough ending to the year on its own, but the situation actually got worse. During his end-of-season physical, Watson complained about discomfort in his ankle, and then MRI confirmed the news that nobody really wanted to hear. The Achilles had re-torn during his rehab process, which required a second surgery and a recovery timeline that the team described as uncertain. He headed into the 2025 offseason having torn the same tendon twice in just a few months, all while the team still owed him $92 million in guaranteed salary over the next 2 seasons. The Browns restructured his contract 3 different times to try and manage the financial damage. Each of those moves pushed money into the future and created void years to spread the dead cap out so the franchise could stay functional. But functional is not the same as healthy. The 2025 draft was approaching and the Browns held the 2nd overall pick, which signaled the end of the experiment. It was finally time to start over. By the time the 2025 draft rolled around, Cleveland held the number 2 overall pick, which typically happens when everything around you falls apart. The Browns decided to trade back a few spots to grab Michigan defensive tackle Mason Graham, but then they made a move that felt both practical and symbolic. They took Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel in the later rounds to compete at quarterback, which meant they suddenly had 2 young guys on rookie deals. Neither of those contracts would make a front office flinch, and the contrast between those low-cost options and what they had been paying Watson was almost impossible to ignore. Shedeur's first year in Cleveland looked exactly like you would expect from a rookie trying to figure out a new system. There are flashes of real talent mixed with plenty of growing pains, but those are the ups and downs a team accepts when they're building from the ground up instead of trying to win the title right now. The franchise finally stopped asking its QB to fix every single problem immediately and just asked them to develop. That is a sentence the Browns couldn't say about their QB situation for 3 straight years, and it signaled a massive shift in how they operated. If you step back and look at the full picture, the true cost of this era goes way beyond Watson's individual stats. Those 3 first-round picks left Cleveland during a window when the rest of the roster was actually ready to compete. Myles Garrett was right in the middle of his prime, the defense had elite pieces, and Kevin Stefanski had already proven he could coach a winner. Those picks didn't just disappear into thin air because they went straight to Houston. And the Texans used that massive haul of capital to rebuild their entire franchise from scratch. Houston used one of those picks to land CJ Stroud, who actually beat them in the playoffs and led the Texans to multiple playoff wins, while the Browns would watch from home year after year. Then the Baker Mayfield situation happened, and you can't really tell this story honestly without sitting with that reality for a second. The QB Cleveland decided wasn't good enough ended up in Tampa Bay. Mayfield threw 41 touchdowns in 2024 and finished top 5 in MVP voting. Whatever version of Baker the Browns saw in 2021 when he was playing through his shoulder harness and watching his front office fly to Houston on social media clearly wasn't the full picture of who he was as a player. The version of him that made the trade look like a good idea just doesn't exist anymore, and everything suggests that version of him might have been long gone before the first injury even happened. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already, and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.